She was ready to die until I sat beside her and said, "You're safe now." The edge of everything. Nora Whitfield stood on the bridge of the cargo freighter Meridian's Hope, watching the stars blur past through the viewport. 3 months ago, she'd been Dr. Nora Whitfield, respected xenobiologist at the Galactic Research Institute. Now she was just another refugee fleeing the Kefir invasion, carrying nothing but the clothes on her back and a lifetime of regrets. The ship shuddered violently, throwing passengers against the walls. Emergency lights bathed everything in hellish red. As Captain Torres's voice crackled over the intercom, "All passengers to emergency stations. We've got Kefir interceptors closing fast." Nora's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd seen what the Kefir did to prisoners. She'd been studying their biology. When they first appeared at the outer colonies, the lucky ones died quickly. The others became test subjects for their biological experiments, twisted into something barely recognizable. As human, she stumbled toward the nearest escape pod bay, fighting through panicked crowds. Children cried as parents held them close. An elderly man sat alone in a corner, staring at a holophoto of his family with vacant eyes. The ship lurched again, harder this time, and the lights flickered ominously. Pod bay sealed due to hull breach. The automated voice announced. Nora's blood turned to ice. The secondary bay was 3 decks down. She'd never make it in time. That another impact. And this time she heard the unmistakable sound of metal tearing through a nearby porthole. She caught sight of the sleek, organic curves of Kefir vessels, latching onto their hull like parasites. Boarding pods. They were coming aboard. The corridor erupted in screams as passengers scattered. Nora pressed herself against the wall, paralyzed with terror. She'd studied the Kefir for years, but seeing them in person was different. They moved like liquid shadows, their biomechanical suits allowing them to flow around corners and through ventilation shafts with inhuman grace. A young mother ran past, clutching her infant son. A Kefir warrior emerged from a side passage, its weapon charging with an ominous whine. Without thinking, Nora threw herself between them. "Run!" she screamed. The energy blast meant for the woman caught Nora in the chest, sending her sprawling. Pain exploded through her torso as her ribs cracked against the deck plating. The mother escaped around the corner with her child, but Nora couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The Kefir warrior approached, its helmet retracting to reveal the grotesque fusion of flesh and technology that served as its face. It spoke in the clicking, hissing language of its kind. She understood enough to know it was pleased with its catch. A xenobiologist would be valuable for their experiments. As darkness crept in at the edges of her vision, Nora thought about her sister Emma back on Earth, probably still believing she was safe at the research station. She thought about all the warnings she'd tried to send to the Galactic Council about Kefir biological weapons, warnings that had been dismissed as alarmist. She thought about David, her research partner, who died when the station fell. The warrior reached for her with one clawed appendage, and Nora closed her eyes. This was how it ended, not in the sterile safety of a laboratory, but bleeding on the deck of a refugee ship, about to become the very thing she'd spent her career studying. Then she heard it, the sharp crack of weapons fire, shouting in Standard Galactic. The clicking of the Kefir warrior turned to a shriek of pain. Then silence. Heavy footsteps approached. Human footsteps. Nora forced her eyes open and found herself looking up at a man in the blue and silver uniform of the Terran Defense Corps. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with kind brown eyes and short-cropped auburn hair. A nasty cut bled freely from his temple, and his uniform was scorched and torn. He knelt beside her, his voice gentle despite the chaos around them. "You're safe now," he said, checking her injuries with practiced efficiency. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Dex Hawthorne, TDC Search and Rescue. We're getting you out of here." For the first time in months, Nora felt something other than despair. She felt hope. The rescue Dex's hands were steady as he worked, but Nora could see the tension in his jaw. The Meridian's Hope continued to shudder under Kefir fire, and she knew their rescue window was closing fast. "Can you move?" he asked, helping her sit up against the bulkhead. His touch was gentle but firm, and she noticed how his fingers lingered just a moment longer than necessary when checking her pulse. "I think so," she managed, though speaking sent sharp pains through her chest. but the others there are families. Children, my team's handling the evacuation, Dex assured her. Sergeant Reeves is coordinating pod launches from the forward bays. We've got most everyone out already. He pulled out a medical scanner, running it over her torso. You've got 3 cracked ribs and some internal bleeding, but nothing immediately life-threatening. Another explosion rocked the ship, this one much closer. Through the smoke, Nora could hear the distinctive whine of Kethfer energy weapons, mixed with the sharp reports of human plasma rifles. Hawthorne, where the hell are you? A woman's voice crackled through his communate. We need to go, now. 2 minutes, Valdez, Dex replied, never taking his eyes off Nora. Got one more civilian to extract. The ship's core is destabilizing. We don't have to minutes. Dex helped Nora to her feet, supporting most of her weight as they moved toward the nearest emergency shaft. What's your name? He asked as they climbed Dr. Nora Whitfield. She gasped between breaths. Xenobiology. He paused. Wait, you're the one who wrote the reports on Kethfer bioweapons? The ones Command buried? She looked at him in surprise. You read them, every word. My unit's been fighting these bastards for 6 months. Your research saved a lot of lives. They reached the emergency airlock where his team waited. Sergeant Valdez, a compact woman with steel-gray eyes, helped Nora into an evacuation suit while 2 other soldiers covered the corridor. Doc, I hate to break up this reunion, Valdez said, but we've got incoming. Lot of incoming. Through the porthole, Nora could see the sleek lines of the TDC destroyer Phoenix Rising holding position alongside the dying freighter. Escape pods dotted the space between the ships like seeds on the wind. Everybody ready? Dex asked. His team nodded. He looked at Nora. Doc, you ever done a combat EVA before? She shook her head, suddenly very aware of how far she was from her quiet laboratory. Stay close to me, he said, sealing his helmet. Don't let go of my hand, no matter what happens. The airlock cycled, and suddenly they were floating in space. The Meridian's hope was dying behind them, atmosphere streaming from dozens of hull breaches like blood from wounds. Kethfer fighters swooped between the debris, hunting for survivors. Dex's grip on her hand was strong and sure as their suit. Thrusters carried them toward the destroyer. But halfway across, everything went wrong. A Kethfer interceptor broke from the pack. Diving straight toward them, Dex shoved Nora toward Valdez and fired his rifle one-handed, the recoil sending him spinning. The alien craft exploded in a ball of superheated plasma, but the shockwave caught them all. Nora's suit tumbled end over end, Dex's hand torn from hers. She watched in horror as he spiraled away into the darkness, his thruster pack damaged and venting propellant. Dex, she screamed into her comm, but got only static. Valdez caught her, dragging her toward the ship. He's gone, Doc. I'm sorry, but he's gone. The Phoenix Rising's hangar bay doors were closing as the last of the survivors came aboard. As Nora was pulled inside, she caught one final glimpse of space, and there, just at the edge of sensor range, was a single suit beacon. Weak, but steady. Wait, she shouted to the bridge crew. There's still someone out there. But the destroyer was already turning away, jumping to hyperspace as Kethfer reinforcements arrived. They left Dex Hawthorne floating alone in the dark. Nora collapsed to her knees on the hangar deck, her heart breaking. The man who'd saved her life, who'd made her feel safe for the first time in months, was gone. And she didn't even know if he felt the same impossible connection she'd felt in those brief moments they'd shared. She stared out at the stars through the closing bay doors and made a promise. Somehow, someway, she would find him again, even if it killed her. The search 6 weeks later, Nora stood in the briefing room of Starbase Kepler, facing a wall of skeptical faces. Fleet Admiral Jackson sat at the head of the table, his weathered features giving nothing away. Round him sat the other members of the Defense Council, their dress uniforms pristine, their expressions carefully neutral. Dr. Whitfield, Admiral Jackson began. You're asking us to authorize a rescue mission into Kethfer-controlled space, based on a single suit beacon that went dark 5 weeks ago. The beacon was active for 72 hours after the Meridians Hope incident, Nora replied, keeping her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Lieutenant Commander Hawthorne's suit has a 14-day life support capacity in emergency mode. There's still a chance. After 6 weeks, General Morrison interrupted. Doctor, with all due respect, that man is dead. We don't risk ships and crews on ghost chases. Nora had spent every day since the rescue studying sensor logs, star charts, and drift calculations. She'd barely slept, barely eaten. Her colleagues at the temporary research facility thought she was having a breakdown. Maybe she was. He saved my life, she said quietly. He saved all our lives. We don't leave people behind. We don't, Admiral Jackson agreed. But we also don't throw good lives after bad. I'm sorry, Doctor. The answer is no. Nora felt something inside her break. She'd known this was coming, had seen it in their faces the moment she'd walked in. But knowing didn't make it hurt less. She was gathering her files when the briefing room door opened. Captain Victoria Sterling walked in, her black hair pulled back in a severe bun, her pale blue eyes scanning the room with the predatory focus of a born warrior. Admiral, she said, taking an empty seat without invitation. Apologies for the interruption. I just received some interesting intelligence from our deep reconnaissance patrol. Jackson frowned. This is a closed session, Captain. I think Dr. Whitfield will find this relevant. Sterling activated the holoprojector, and a three-dimensional star map appeared above the table. 16 hours ago, we intercepted a HFY transmission from the Xerian system. They were requesting a xenobiology specialist to examine what they called a contaminated human specimen. Nora's heart stopped. Xerian system, that's where the drift calculations placed his suit. Could be anyone, General Morrison said dismissively. Sterling smiled coldly. The transmission specifically mentioned a human in TDC search and rescue. Colors, found alive but infected with an unknown pathogen. They're keeping him in medical isolation while they study him. The room fell silent. Admiral Jackson leaned forward. How reliable is this intelligence? Gold-rated source. HFY don't lie about biology, it's their religion. Sterling looked directly at Nora. Doctor, you're the only xenobiologist this side of the core worlds. If someone is going after your lieutenant commander, they'll need your expertise. He's not my, Nora began, then stopped. Why was she protesting? Because of what people might think? Because she'd known him for less than an hour? Because admitting she cared about him made her vulnerable? I'll go, she said simply. Admiral Jackson shook his head. Absolutely not. You're a civilian, and you're too valuable to risk in enemy territory. With respect, Admiral, Sterling interjected. My ship is fast, stealthy, and my crew is very good at impossible rescues. We could be in and out before the HFY knew we were there. And if you're wrong, if this intelligence is false, Sterling shrugged, then we've wasted some fuel, and I get to blow up a HFY research station. I'm okay with that. Outcome. The debate raged for another hour, but Nora barely heard it. Her mind was racing with possibilities. Dex was alive, injured, maybe dying, but alive. The man who'd risked everything to save strangers was now trapped in the hands of creatures who would dissect him piece by piece in the name of science. She thought about his kind eyes, his gentle touch, the way he'd made her feel safe in the middle of chaos. She thought about the connection she'd felt, something she'd never experienced with anyone before, not even David. When the vote came, it was 3-2 against the mission. Nora felt her world crumble. Then Sterling stood. Admiral, I have a confession. My ship suffered a navigation error and accidentally strayed into HFY space. Purely accidental. Of course, if we happen to encounter any human prisoners during our journey back to friendly territory, well, that's just good fortune. Jackson's eyes narrowed. Captain Sterling, if you're suggesting what I think you're suggesting, I'm not suggesting anything, sir. Just reporting a navigation error. She looked at Nora. Doctor, would you be interested in serving as xenobiology consultant for this mapping expedition? Nora smiled for the first time in weeks. When do we leave? Into the dark TDC Corvette Shadowhawk dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Xerian system. Like a whisper in the dark, Captain Sterling's ship was built for stealth, matte black hull, sensor dampeners, engines designed to run silent and cold. Perfect for the kind of mission that officially didn't exist. Nora floated in the observation bubble. watching the alien stars wheel slowly past, 3 days out from Kepler Station. And she still couldn't quite believe she was here. The rational part of her mind, the scientist, kept insisting this was madness. You couldn't mount a rescue operation based on feelings you'd had for a man you'd known for minutes. But the other part of her, the part that had felt something electric in Dex's touch, that had seen something in his eyes that spoke to her soul, that part knew she was exactly where she needed to be. "Doc, you might want to see this," Chief Petty Officer Torres called from the sensor station. Nora pushed off from the viewing port and floated over to his console. On the screen was the HFY research station, a grotesque fusion of grown biomatter and constructed metal that looked like a tumor growing on the asteroid it was anchored to. Ships moved around it like antibodies, their organic curves alien and threatening. "That's not the scary part," Torres continued, highlighting several sections of the station with red markers. "These heat signatures, they're consistent with biological containment units. Lots of them." Captain Sterling drifted over, her expression grim. "How many prisoners are we looking at? Maybe 40 or 50 humans. Could be more." Torres pulled up another screen. "But here's the interesting part. There's one containment unit that's isolated from the others. High security, triple redundancy on the bioseals, whatever they've got in there. They really don't want it getting out." "That's him," Nora said with certainty. "That's where they're keeping Dex." Sterling raised an eyebrow. "You're sure? The transmission mentioned contamination. They'd isolate him to prevent spread to their other test subjects." Nora studied the station schematics, her xenobiology training kicking in. "The HFY are terrified of biological contamination. It's why they wear those biomechanical suits. If they think he's infected with something unknown, they'll take every precaution." "Which makes our job harder," Sterling observed. "Breaking into a standard holding cell is one thing. Getting past triple biocontainment is another. The planning took 6 hours. They would use the station's own paranoia against it." Nora would pose as a captured xenobiologist, someone the HFY would want to consult about the mysterious infection. Sterling's team would provide distraction and extraction. It was a thin plan, dependent on too many variables. But it was the only chance they had. As they approached the station in a modified shuttle, Nora felt her pulse quicken. Through the viewports, she could see the biomechanical surface of the station, writhing slowly, almost like it was breathing. Gun emplacements tracked their approach with predatory patience. "Remember," Sterling said over the comm, "once you're inside, you've got 30 minutes before we blow the reactor. Find him and get to the extraction point, or we're all having a very bad day." The shuttle shuddered as tractor beams locked on. HFY boarding pods attached to the hull with wet, organic sounds. The airlock cycled. And suddenly Nora was face to face with her nightmares. The HFY boarding party was led by a commander whose biosuit had grown partially into his flesh, creating the disturbing hybrid of living tissue and technology that marked their officer class. He spoke in the clicking, hissing language of his people, and Nora forced herself to respond in halting HFY basic. "I am Dr. Nora Whitfield, xenobiologist. I understand you have a contamination problem." The commander's suit translated her words, and she could see interest flickering in his compound eyes. He gestured for her to follow, and soon she was walking through corridors that felt more like the inside of some vast organism than a starship. The biocontainment section was a maze of organic walls and pulsing conduits. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and something else, something that reminded her of a hospital ward. As they moved deeper into the station, she began to hear something that made her heart race. Singing. Someone was singing in a low, rough voice, an old Earth ballad she recognized from her childhood. Dex was alive, hurt, maybe dying, but alive and still himself enough to sing. She was going to find him. She was going to bring him home. And maybe, just maybe, she was going to tell him how she felt. Safe now. The biocontainment chamber was a nightmare of organic technology. Pulsing walls secreted a constant film of antiseptic fluid, while monitoring tendrils snaked through the air like blind worms. At the center of it all, suspended in a translucent biopod filled with oxygenated fluid, was Dex. He looked terrible. His body was covered in angry red welts where the HFY biosensors had been attached, and she could see the dark lines of infection spreading along his veins. But his eyes were alert, And when he saw her through the pod's membrane, they widened with something that looked like wonder. The Kefir commander clicked impatiently, gesturing at the various readouts surrounding the pod. Through the translation matrix, his words came out as stilted standard. Human specimen shows resistance to standard bioassimilati. On protocols, cellular structure appears to be rejecting our enhancement viruses. We require your expertise to overcome this inconvenience. Nora forced herself to look clinical, professional, even as her heart raced. She could see Dex mouthing something. She thought it might be her name. Interesting, she said aloud, moving closer to examine the monitors. Have you tried adjusting the viral load? Sometimes human immune systems can be stubborn. While the commander was distracted by her technical suggestions, Nora caught Dex's eye and mouthed silently, "Sterling, 30 minutes. He gave an almost imperceptible nod. "The contamination appears to be spreading," she continued, pointing at the infection readouts. "You may need to consider more aggressive containment measures." The commander hissed agreement, then barked orders to his subordinates. They scuttled away to adjust various biomechanical controls, leaving Nora alone with the pod and with Dex. She pretended to study the readouts while actually working on the pod's release mechanism. Kefir biotechnology was complex, but not incomprehensible. She'd spent years studying their systems. The trick was making it look accidental. "The immune response is fascinating," she said for the benefit of the recording devices, fingers dancing across the control surfaces. "I've never seen cellular resistance quite like this." The pod's bioseals began to dilate. Emergency indicators flashed, but she quickly silenced them. The fluid began to drain. "Curious," she murmured. "The containment system seems to be responding to the subject's immune activity. Perhaps a defensive mechanism we haven't encountered before." Dex's pod cracked open with a wet, organic sound. He gasped, coughing up biofluid, his body shaking from weeks of forced suspension. But when their eyes met, he smiled, that same gentle smile she remembered from the rescue. "You came for me," he whispered. "You said I was safe," she replied, helping him sit up. "Figured I owed you the same." An alarm began to wail. Not their doing. Sterling's team had started their diversionary attack. The station shuddered under weapons fire, and emergency lighting bathed everything in hellish red. The Kefir commander burst back into the chamber, weapon raised. But Nora was ready. She'd palmed a biodisruptor from the medical station, a device normally used to sterilize tissue cultures, but equally effective at shorting out Kefir biosuits. The commander collapsed, his hybrid nervous system overloaded. His subordinates were similarly affected, their biomechanical enhancements sparking and failing. "Can you walk?" Nora asked Dex. He struggled to his feet, still shaky but determined. "For you, I'd crawl through hell." They made their way through corridors filled with smoke and chaos. The station was coming apart around them as Sterling's assault team methodically destroyed critical systems. Other prisoners had broken free in the confusion. Humans who'd been held for weeks or months, skeletal and traumatized but alive. "This way," Nora shouted, leading them toward the extraction point. But as they rounded a corner, they came face to face with a squad of Kefir warriors in full combat armor. Dex stepped in front of her, unarmed but unflinching. "Go," he said quietly. "Get the others out." "Not without you, Nora." "No." She moved to stand beside him. "We do this together or not at all." The lead warrior raised his weapon, energy coils charging with malevolent light. But before he could fire, Captain Sterling appeared behind him like a ghost, her plasma blade sliding between his armor plates. The other warriors fell to her team's coordinated assault. Touching reunion. Sterling said dryly, "But we really need to leave now." The extraction shuttle was waiting in the station's main hangar, engines already spinning up. As they lifted off, Nora could see explosions blossoming throughout the biostation's structure. Sterling hadn't been kidding about blowing the reactor. They made hyperspace just as the station died in a brilliant flash of light. Later, in the shuttle's small medical bay, Nora sat beside Dex's cot, holding his hand while the autodoc worked to purge the Kefir biotoxins from his system. He was sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks, but she couldn't bring herself to leave. "He'll be fine," Sterling said from the doorway. Tough bastard. Takes more than alien bioweapons to keep a good rescue pilot down. Thank you, Nora said softly. For risking your ship, your crew. Sterling smiled. Hell, Doc, after seeing what you two went through for each other, I'm a romantic at heart. As if summoned by her words, Dex's eyes opened. He looked up at Nora, his gaze clear and focused for the first time since the rescue. Hey, he said. Softly. Hey yourself. She squeezed his hand. How do you feel? Like I've been marinated in alien bio soup for 6 weeks. He paused, studying her face. But better now, much better, good. Because when we get back to Kepler Station, I'm buying you dinner, a real dinner, not military rations or alien biofluid. He laughed, and the sound made her heart sing. Is that a date, Dr. Whitfield? That's a date. Lieutenant Commander Hawthorne. He squeezed her hand, and she felt that same electric connection she'd experienced during the rescue stronger now, tempered by what they'd been through together. Nora, he said quietly, when I was in that pod, thinking I was going to die, the only thing that kept me going was remembering your face, the way you looked when I told you that you were safe. She leaned down and kissed him, soft and gentle and full of promise. You're safe now too, she whispered against his lips. We both are, and for the first time in years, she believed it completely.